you all. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evening unfolds, and we hope you all will participate and share your thoughts with us in the chat box throughout the evening, and we'll also have time for Q&A and discussion at the end. And I see some of you guys have your videos on. If you're able to, we really encourage that just so that, Birju can see you. There can be a little bit more of a back and forth. It's always great to see how things are landing for everybody. Great, so nice to see all these faces. So this event is hosted by Dharma Realm Buddhist University. We're a small liberal arts university in Northern California that really hopes not only to support students in becoming responsible, reflective, and caring individuals, but to also really learn what a meaningful life really is for them as individuals. And I'm really honored to be introducing our speaker this evening, Birju Pandya. Birju, he's a good friend and board member here at DRBU, and I think he's particularly well poised to be exploring with us these questions of how we can align our work, our career with our deeper values. He's been involved in several seemingly disparate realms, from meat reduction and regenerative agriculture to real estate and business. Professionally, he's worked as a consultant at McKinsey, a senior advisor at RSF Social Finance, and is now a director at Mobius, a value-driven financial services company. And sort of just looking through all that Birju has been and continues to be involved in, it's kind of difficult to sum it up very concisely and like create a nice little story. So I think maybe a little snapshot of his life probably best encapsulates his approach and his commitment to what's important to him. So this is a story that maybe, I don't know, Birju has heard people tell about him a lot, so hopefully he'll just entertain me for this. So some years ago, when Birju was working at an investment banking firm, he had done a really good job that year, and his boss was really impressed. And so he sat Birju down one day and said, "You've done really good, Birju. You can have anything. What do you want?" And so at a, investment banking firm, you can ask for a lot of stuff, a lot of material things, maybe a lot of money. And Birju thought for a moment and said, "I'd like to start every team meeting we have with a minute of silence." And there was a long pause. And then his boss said, "No." And Birju's like, "Well, just sleep on it. Like, just think it over." And so the boss is like, okay, I'll think about it. I'll sleep on it. And the next morning, who knows what changed? His boss agreed to this unconventional request and was like, "Okay, I'll play your game. We'll try this out." And the changes that occurred from just this 1 minute, 60 seconds, um, you know, people wanted more silence. People wanted more opportunities for reflection. Um, they wanted to do different types of retreats as a team. They started implementing acts of kindness, generosity, and service, to even reflecting more deeply on how their work is actually impacting the world. All these changes, all these kind of ripples that probably nobody could have predicted. And so with that little snapshot of Birju's life, I'm so excited we have him here today to speak on this really relevant and important topic. And so glad you guys are all joining us here today. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Birju.
Thanks so much, Brenda. It's touching to hear that lovely introduction. I am really grateful to be here. I'm seeing a lot of faces that I've come across before and new friends I hope to stay in touch with coming out of this conversation as well. I find DRBU to be a place where the topics of this evening have been held for many years and in deep ways. So it's a joy to be included. As just a logistical point, my understanding is we are here together for roughly an hour. I'll look to speak for 30-ish minutes of that, and then have more of a dialogue space to have people be able to share the reflections that come up as part of this, and maybe even be able to share with each other, depending on how it plays. So I wanted to start with a quick story of one of my friends. He was an environmental consultant, He cared a lot about how to help others in his life. And so he's very diligent in his work. He took a lot of notes. He was an active participant in meetings. The idea of what he did was something that felt aligned with him. He would stay up late reading documents to try to help his clients, right? And this is a conversation we're having today about career. And so this feels meaningful. I was able to join him for one of those meetings. And I saw some of the things that he meant by his own viewpoint of saying he was an active participant. So he would notice when he's sitting in this meeting, when the group got hungry. He was paying attention not just to the topic, but the context. And he quietly got up, he cut up a few apples, and he shared them with everyone on the team. And he told me later that while his job was to be an environmental consultant, his work was to notice how to love people around him every chance that he got. And that's a seed of what I'd like to share more about with you today. Before I dive in a little bit more about myself in terms of professional context, beyond what Brenda was saying a little earlier, I began my career after graduating college a little over 20 years ago now, and I've experienced a variety of different working paths. That includes for-profits, nonprofits, some government work, along with religious organizations that I've worked with, and more recently with an educational institution in DRBU. Along this path, I've been asking this question of meaning and purpose and values throughout. Some of the questions that come up for me and have come up over time include, what does it matter if I'm doing this work? Do I have to put myself on pause when I'm working? Is this work actually helping? How would I even know if I'm doing any good? And does it matter if I don't feel great, even though the story I tell about what I do is nice? So I want to share with you some of how I've lived into those questions today. And I wanted to begin by offering you a framework to sit with. I'll end with some invitations for you to reflect on it. For the sake of discussion, like we're all here today to ask this question about a career. And we want to align that career with our values, but we all have an implicit understanding of what a career even is. So I wanted to offer you a framework that said a career is composed of 3 parts. Most of the time, our society tends to focus on one of those 3 parts. And that first part is what you do. That's your career. And over time, you might have different things that you do, but fundamentally, that's what you've been doing. So I want to offer 2 others along with that. Along with what you do is who you do it with, and along with that is how you do it. Big questions. And so I wanted to break down what I mean by each of these as part of this conversation, sort of background context. So maybe the more obvious one here to be talking about is what you do. I mean, these are tangible products and services that we're working on. Whatever, there's a whiteboard experience. I hope that's okay. I will keep talking and assume it's all fine. Things like products and services. Any one of us who's going to be involved in any organization, working with others, et cetera, or even working by yourself, you're bringing products and services to the table. I'm going to give you a span of different ways to even think about that. You could be a medical professional. You could work with schools and learning, or clean water, or help the environment, or engage with systems and how we think. This list goes on and on. And there's a lot of detail about what it means to do that kind of work, which I want to get to as part of this conversation. In fact, it might be worthwhile to dive a little bit into it soon, but I'll come. I have some slides to want to talk to you about that with. The second piece of who you do it with that feels really meaningful. And certainly from my 20 years of experience, what I've seen is the importance of that for a reason that's been backed up by science. So most of what I've seen with the new science that's coming out now talks about how a lot of what we do and a lot of what we think as people is on autopilot. It's mostly subconscious. Our thoughts are out of our control. And the thing that's programming our thoughts is the water that we swim in, the people that we're around, etc. So to be around virtue is to be around examples and opportunities that program the subconscious tape that we are all engaging with and don't necessarily know it. It's a sort of skillful way of trying to design around what is a sort of design approach of how we exist as humans. In fact, Buddha said something to this end when he said that noble friends are the whole path of virtue development. It comes from that understanding that the whole path is the whole path because it's what's going to be programming your subconscious. And of course, along with that, you get to build relationships with the virtuous, and that's pretty fantastic as well, because over time, that can create more opportunities to serve others and maybe even support the collective. So that's the second reason, or the second part of the framing of career, who you work with. The third one, how you work. This is a question of what is the water that we swim in. I remember working or being connected to an organization that was a social enterprise. It was creating solar-powered lamps that could be given to those who were in very destitute conditions in third world nations, for lack of a better phrase. And the conversations were all about how much value this kind of work can do. My friend who worked in the organization was going through depression at the time because the culture was toxic. And those were not the kinds of things that we could talk about in a context where we're asking, oh, how can you do something that's meaningful and purposeful, unless you start to include the how as part of that question. And so things like governance, like non-sexy things, right? Who's running the organization? How do they decide? How do we think about culture? How do we handle conflict? How do we make decisions? And then stuff that's even more subtle. How do we all engage with our inner life? Do we self-reflect? Do we explore our unconscious tapes that I referenced earlier? Does things like generosity and gratitude and mindfulness matter in our context? In this frame, we're limited more by creativity than anything else. And yet, the standard default of our culture tends to be one that doesn't support expansive ways of growing as it relates to how we show up to our workplace. So in each of these domains, I've seen a variety of different ways that people and organizations can bring their values to the table. You know, another quote by Buddha that is meaningful as part of that kind of framework. What he said was, do good, avoid harm, and keep purifying the mind. And in each of these domains, what it means to do good in terms of how you do your work life. Today, you might have an answer to that, and that's great, do it. But as you keep purifying your mind, your answer might start to change as time goes on. And that's something I wanted to offer a little bit more context on before diving deeper. Can I keep going? Are you hearing me okay? I saw a comment here saying there's some audio difficulties. Thumbs up? Thumbs up, great. I'm gonna share my screen. I wanna just offer you a couple of slides here to talk through. Thumbs up, you can see? Here we go, thank you. So this slide, I'll let you read it through. I'm gonna offer some words in in context for you as you read. The point here is to talk about how business activities, the things we do in organizations, as a whole, are currently supporting ecocide. And what ecocide means is the end of the systems that we depend on to live. It's an inconvenient truth. And it's not just applicable to any particular company, you know, like we could just point at ExxonMobil and say, okay, they're the bad guys, or any industry. It's actually related to the rules of the game that we are all playing. I'm going to move to the next slide. So, what is the rules of the game that we're playing? What you'll see on the left side here is a little bit more about what those rules are. And what you'll see on the right is an alternative story that a context like Dharma Realm Buddhist University can speak to. There are economists who talk about some of the limitations of the rules of the game we've created right now. Those rules include that we can't ever be happy unless we consume more and more. Well, that's a story. Do we choose to believe it? And all this stuff filters into the organizations we work for, the kind of sustenance that we're looking to get out of our economic activities, etc. I'm sharing all this so that you have the context of the world that we're trying to live a career in. So if we look at this and we see this breakdown, we say, okay, 90% of the jobs that exist in the world are for profit. And those jobs, they follow a storyline that fundamentally breaks down when you research it. I'm going to move to the next slide. And I can share this after to the extent that that's meaningful. I'm happy to take that feedback. So this slide, it talks about how nature works. There's different ways of understanding it. I just offer this to you as a skillful framework to the extent that you feel called into it. There's a world of research out there that studies how does nature grow and change? What does it mean for ecocide to happen? What you'll see on the bottom left, the area that says degenerating system, that's closer to how our society operates right now. One step better than breaking the law. And the reason I say that is if you look at basically anything that a person does in an organization, there comes a point where it touches nature. And when it touches nature, there's a question. Are we taking from nature or are we giving to nature? And I don't just mean the nature out there. I also mean the nature in here, human nature, the heart, the connection between all of this. So what you'll see here is a breakdown of saying there are ways to engage with our system that are degenerative. And there are ways to engage with the system that move up towards a regenerating system. I'm going to give you just a short example of how that is in life. I'm fond of a particular aspect of household life, which is understanding the nature of a toilet. So I want to talk to you about that. Funny, but it's also accessible. All of us know about it. The average toilet in the Western world, every time we flush, throws away 5 gallons of water. Few years, decades ago, people came across that understanding and said, wait a second, throwing away 5 gallons of water every time you flush for no good reason doesn't seem like a great thing. We should have low flow toilets. So now we're starting to move up from the conventional practice part of this slide up to green, high performance, right? We're only going to throw away 2 gallons, 1 gallon, half a gallon. And if you keep going, you might even get to no gallons, right? Maybe if we all died and we stopped using toilets, that would be the best. And with this way of thinking, if you're caught in a degenerative system, that's the best you can do. That's where the other side of this story comes in, a regenerating system. You go above the line and you start finding things like compost toilets. In a compost toilet, first of all, you might find that sights and smells are not the same as what they are when it's made with porcelain. But at the same time, every time a person uses a compost toilet, they build soil. And if you go even further and you can purify that soil, you can actually use it to grow all kinds of things, from textiles to food, food for self, food for others, etc. And you end up being in a system where our existence is supporting nature, is supporting human nature, supporting external nature. So the question is, why not do that? How to engage with a world that understands that, you know, we are in a degenerating system, and it would be worthwhile to go to a regenerating system as it relates to what we're doing. And the answer to that is economics. It turns out that if you're on the lower left side, there's a lot more money to be made. And I wanted to show you that on the next slide. This is an analogy to the healthcare system. It's the same thing, degenerating to regenerating, right? Bottom left, degenerating, top right, regenerating. So as far as the healthcare system is concerned, in a degenerating system of today, if you want to be helpful, if you know what you're doing as part of career, if you want to do something good, then you want to engage in triage more and more. That means doctors, nurses, medical care professionals, they're doing good work, super important. And every year, there will be more people getting sick, more people coming into the hospitals. We'll all say we're doing good, and every year people will get sicker. If you think more upstream, you get to stage 2. Let's start building more hospitals. And a way you can work in that dimension is be a hospital administrator. Work in trying to build networks of better medical care across different locations, etc. We go further. We say, okay, well, what's higher stream than that? Pharmaceuticals, supplements. It's meaningful because then they don't even end up in the hospitals or much less emergency room where those kinds of degenerative resources are needed. If we go further upstream, we find there are changes to lifestyles that are possible. Yoga teachers, people who work on organic certification, farmers, etc. And going even further, people who are trying to share the message of how just looking at the world in a different way can change how one lives one's life. That picture is of a Japanese spiritual teacher, specifically focused on agriculture. His name is Masanobu Fukuoka. There are people out there who share such messages. There are authors out there. There are people who are making movies and different kinds of entertainment approaches that can help change worldviews. So if you look up and down this spectrum, there are ways to do good across this whole spectrum, right? And you can have a great story to tell, and it would be meaningful. The question is, how do we engage where we are internally that speaks to our needs and allows us to continue to grow? I think there's a lot of different ways to speak to that question. Obviously, when you're in stage 1, we all know, there's a lot more money in being a doctor than being a yoga teacher. But we are also in a world where we can define and decide our life choices in much more nuanced ways. So, for example, my partner is a nurse, but she works part-time. And she's also really interested in how to play a role in helping people change their lifestyle behaviors. And she spends a significant amount of time there. The reason she does that, or she's able to do that, is because we're asking questions together about how to live simply. So it's all sort of intertwining as we ask this question around how do you engage in a system in a more skillful way. And it's an ongoing question. I'm not giving you an answer per se. I'm just talking to you about a way to think about it. So let me stop sharing the screen here. Bear with me. Thumbs up on if you follow. I know those are dense slides, but it seems really meaningful. Okay, the folks who are on video are with me, so I appreciate that. I want to name that when we talk about being regenerative, right, creating or supporting a system that allows for the nature of life, the nature of community, the nature of ourselves to grow, that is applicable across a variety of different sectors. I'm talking about food, technology, law, medicine, housing, education, entertainment, right? Like I could just keep going. There's a lot of different places where this could happen. I don't want you to think that like, oh, there's only a few places here, like healthcare is one example. The point of all this is what you do is a complicated question. And while there are limitations to the system we're in, we get to design. And there are opportunities that are only limited by our ability to be exposed to what's out there. So that's that first question of what we're doing. There's a second and third question. The second question is, who are we working with? I want to offer you some of the questions that supported me in that orientation. One is, who in your life do you feel holds virtue? Just sitting with that question creates some possibilities of people you'd want to be affiliated with more, because they're doing something in the world. Who is engaged in community, in work that overlaps with your interest? I can share this with you later as questions if you like. And to really put rubber to the road, what are ways that you could have a conversation with such a person, moving beyond the binary of either I find full-time work or I don't, to other creative possibilities of engagement? And over time, find that they connect to each other, right? So being connected to people who are asking questions of virtue also lends itself to coming across different opportunities of what to do that is also expansive, creative, novel. Leading me to the third category, how we work. I want to linger on this a little bit. I think there's a lot of examples. I'll give you a few that I've come across that have been meaningful to me. There's a group in Spain, an organization called the Mondragon Cooperatives. They do a lot of different work, but what they're most known for is textiles. They make clothes and linens. They're also collectively owned. They make decisions collectively. They actually live in intentional community for the most part with each other. I'm not saying that this is what you should go do. I'm just sort of offering things to stretch minds. But there are ways to be engaged economically with people who are in it together in very creative ways. There are people who've decided to run their organization not using top-down hierarchical structures based on primarily shareholder interest or who has the relationship with the funder, to approaches, the words that I've used and I've heard used. One is called sociocracy, another is called dharmocracy, ways of making decisions that are about community first, virtue first, and it brings its own complexities, of course, but a very different way to show up to work. And these are things that you could also dive into, explore, invite, lots of different sort of high-level possibilities. And of course, that's also something that you could say, well, that's high level, right? Like, I'm not running an organization, and so that might not be calling to me. Fair? And I think there's other opportunities here as well. Specifically talking about culture. There's books. I can share some books afterwards. One of them that has been particularly supportive for me is called, it's a tongue twister, Deliberately Developmental Organizations. It's a book talking about how being in an organization can help you discover yourself. And a big piece of that is inviting a growth mindset for whoever is part of the organization. A growth mindset means you can wake up today and be better than you were yesterday and continue to evolve how you see the world, how you engage with the world, be in service, etc. to have an organization exist to do that for its people is the purpose of organization. There are organizations out there that live like that. A lot of them, regenerative or whether they call themselves other things. These are ways of looking at the world that are increasingly getting traction. Even the organization that I used to work with that I would consider somewhat stodgy, a management consulting firm called McKinsey, they are prototypically thought of as very much conventional. One day every year, everyone stops working and they all come together and they talk about one topic, which is the topic that we're talking about here, values. Everything about that day is to discuss how are we trying to live our values more deeply, because it's that important even to the most conventional places. So I find this like again and again manifesting in different ways. There's a company out there that's doing medical care, and one of the ways that they talk to every employee in the group is to say, how do you live your life today so that you treat everyone like your family member, right? Anyone that calls you, you're a medical care provider. You are empowered to have however you share be about treating the person in front of you as though they're your mother. Very different way to be able to show up. I've seen this happen for shoe companies as well as for medical care companies. Just lots of different pathways to that end. A pathway for us to step into that from a bottoms up standpoint can be from a place of personal practice, right? Practices of mindfulness, practices of gratitude, practices of generosity, even if people who are in power positions in an organization are not bringing them to the table, being able to practice that ourselves, maybe growing the practice by sharing some of the research behind it with leadership. There's all kinds of this kind of nuance and complexity that I've seen and been exposed to. I really appreciate it. Even my friend who is serving Apple, the environmental consultant, he would use these things called smile cards from an organization that several of us here volunteer with. They're cards that basically just are a pay it forward of kindness. And you do an act of kindness for someone, you leave a card behind. If you go to kindspring.org, you will find the smile cards. They're freely available. The idea behind it is you can keep a chain of kindness going. So he would do that in his office. In addition to whatever's happening from the top down, there's all these bottom up opportunities as well. The point of sharing all this is that there's infinite explorations that people have done in aligning values with work. I've seen nothing that's perfect. I think a lot of us look for that silver bullet. What's going to handle everything? I find that we are interconnected and we are clouded and we're doing the best we can. So to work within a complex structure demands asking, what suits me? Where am I now? How can I be humble about that? But if I start now and I keep stacking, that also means that there's all kinds of possibilities over time. And I wanted to really name that here. Is for me, I've been operating 20 years in this direction. Stacking little actions, the action that Brenda mentioned at the beginning, just continuing to explore however I could. What I've seen happen has been sort of stunning on that regard, and I can share more stories about that if you like later. What I've found is that doing little practices and growing them, that can happen anywhere. You don't need a boss that's online with that. You can, if you don't have a job and you're looking for an organization, these are the kinds of things you can be looking for. But if you're already in an organization, there are plenty of ways to engage with your life and your organizational life that still fit questions of values growth as part of it. These everyday practices being stepping stones to compassion and insight. To that end, I want to come back to the story that I started with about my friend. He didn't stop at cutting up apples. He did do that, and he wanted to continue growing it. It led him to DRBU, and he took on further contemplative practice here, asking even deeper questions. he decided from that step that he wanted to do a pilgrimage of love. So he bicycled across the world and he stayed wherever people offered him a place to stay, and he would write about it. And all the people who had passed along his journey would listen in as part of that. And when he biked all the way back to where his family originally was from in China, he found a conscious living community where he could share these practices that he's been developing with people who have conventional power in China, and they want to listen. And so he's still serving others as best he can. But when he started this kind of work 8-10 years ago, he couldn't see that this is the sort of direction that he was headed towards by doing all of this, by learning the context he was in, and then taking on opportunities here and there. And I say this to name that it's that clarity of the seeds that you're planting, and to keep stacking, to keep doing things, to keep seeing what else can I do? How else can I be of service? That leads to outcomes that we don't know. I'm almost done. I'm going to finish in a couple minutes here. I want to share a parable. In it, this parable is from Tibetan Buddhism. It's called the Shambhala prophecy. And they talk about the times of degeneration, right? And I've shared a little bit with you guys today about my understanding of what that is. You can make a case that we're in times of degeneration right now. In these times, the prophecy says there will be people who are born to walk a path of bringing about collective transformation. Not a career question, the question of a life mandate in a world of ecocide. The prophecy says that these people will turn towards the forces of degeneration, and they will do it with two tools: the tool of insight and the tool of, and they will turn the tide of collective consciousness through their sincerity. There's a way of looking at what I'm here to share today that's not about talking to you about your career. I'm here to offer you a skillful framing for growing your values in service to living beings at a time when that is particularly meaningful. So how does this go from nice stories to personally landing for you? I had a few questions that I could put in the chat window. I'll read them out. And I'd love for you to sit with them. You know, maybe speak to them now, maybe speak to them for yourself to reflect in coming days and weeks. And then I'm happy to shift to questions and dialogue. 3 questions, I'll name them, and I wrote them down. So, first one, who are the people in my life that I'd like to work more with, full-time or not? And what values do they have that speak to me? The second question, what kinds of practices do I want to take on? The smaller, the better. That will move me 1% towards values in my work. And I'm talking about things like kindness, gratitude, mindfulness, curiosity, joy. And the third question, when I reflect on what keeps me from stepping more deeply towards my values, what emotions might I be avoiding? How can I love myself when those emotions come up? I'm going to paste them right here. These are the types of questions that lead to self-inquiry. And that's exactly the kind of education that Dharma Realm Buddhist University leads people into. Again, my gratitude to DRBU for hosting today. And with that, I'll close by sharing my gratitude for your attention. I'm feeling your love and your willingness to be here and listen to me talk for darn near 40 minutes. I hope to have this conversation continue today and ongoingly. I'll hand it back to Brenda for now and see what's coming up for you.